Okay, today we're going to be looking at simplifying rational expressions. And so we're going to be looking at basically fractions that contain variables and looking at canceling out their common factors. We also need to remember that when we're looking at a rational expression, we have excluded values. We have solutions for our x that are not possible because we cannot have our denominator be 0. So we always start by finding our excluded values, and then we're going to factor both the numerator and the denominator, and we're going to cancel out any common factors that we see in both. So we're taking a look here at our first expression. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to figure out what our excluded values are. So we know that we cannot have our denominator equal to 0. So our excluded value would be 2x squared equals 0. We would solve that. And so we know that x cannot equal 0. That's our excluded value. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to factor. If we have a number like we do in our numerator, we want to look at the prime factorization. So we want to start by finding the prime factorization of 12. And so that would be 2 to the second power times 3. And I'm actually going to write that out as 2 times 2, and there's a reason I'm going to do it that way so that we can see the common factors that we are going to be canceling. And then in our denominator, we have 2 times x to the second power. And so what we want to do is we want to cancel out. They both have a common 2. So the 2's are going to cancel out, and that leaves us in our numerator, 2 times 3 is 6. And in our denominator, x squared. And remember that that's our simplified expression, but x cannot be equal to 0. We're going to do the same thing for our next one. We're going to start by finding our excluded values. So we know that n plus 8 cannot equal 0. So we subtract 8, and we see that n cannot equal negative 8. So our excluded value is negative 8. Now on this one, we're looking for common factors, and we notice that there's nothing to factor out in our numerator, and there's nothing to factor out in our denominator. So this is actually already in simplest form. There is not a common factor between the numerator and the denominator, so that cannot be simplified any further. Okay, we're going to go ahead and look here, and we're going to start by finding our excluded values. So we have 2 factors in our denominator here, so we need to set each factor equal to 0. So 6y equal to 0 and y minus 7 equal to 0. So we see that our excluded values are 0 and 7. So we have 2 excluded values. Now we want to go ahead and simplify by factoring. So our numerator is 3 times y times y. Our denominator, we're going to factor out the 6y, so we're going to do the prime factorization of 6. So 6's prime factorization is 2 times 3 times y minus 7. Now I need to leave the y minus 7 in parentheses because that entire thing is a factor. So I can cancel out the 3, and I can cancel out the y. And so what's left here is just a y in the numerator. And in my denominator, I have 2 times y minus 7. Okay. Now we're going to get into some that have a little bit more complicated factoring. So again, we always start by stating our excluded values. So we look at our denominator, z minus 1 is equal to 0. So we know that z cannot equal positive 1. That is our excluded value. Now we're going to go ahead and factor, and hopefully we're noticing that our numerator is a difference of squares. So this becomes 1 plus z times 1 minus z. And then in our denominator, we have z minus 1. Okay, so this is interesting because we can definitely see that there's some similarities, but the order does matter because this is a -1 in the denominator, but in the numerator we have a -z. So we want to try to rearrange this factor that seems similar so that we're going to be able to cancel them out. So there's a couple things that we're going to do here. So I'm going to put that factor first, and I'm going to pull out a negative from it. And so that will allow me to have my z. And then because I'm pulling out a negative, this would be -1 because a negative times a negative is a +1. And up here, I have a +1. So by pulling that negative out, I can now rearrange the order of those terms in the parentheses. And then I can just leave this one as 1 plus z. If you prefer to write z plus 1, that would be okay also. And so then we have z minus 1. So here's our common factor, this z minus 1 and z minus 1. We're able to go ahead and cancel those out, which eliminates our denominator. And now we just have the opposite of 1 plus z, which we actually will distribute out to become -z minus 1. And so that would be simplest form. And again, I just rearranged the order, putting the variable first. Okay, taking a look down here, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to factor both our numerator and our denominator. So our numerator becomes c plus 4 times c minus 3. Our denominator becomes c plus 4 times c minus 5. And right away, hopefully we're seeing our common factor, so the c plus 4's cancel out. And we have c minus 3 over c minus 5. So that would be our simplified form. And then, of course, we don't want to forget, now that we factored this, to find our excluded values. So we have two factors. We have c plus 4 equals 0, and we have c minus 5 equals 0. So we would subtract 4, so c cannot equal -4. That's an excluded value. We would add 5, and so c cannot equal +5. These are our excluded values. So anytime we have a fraction, we always need to look at that denominator and find the excluded values. Okay, we'll take a look at a word problem here, and it says the surface area to volume ratio of a substance increases. As it increases, it reacts faster with other substances. So basically, the more surface area there is, the quicker it's going to react. Write and simplify this ratio for a block of ice. So basically, we're comparing the surface area to the volume. So we need to remember our formulas for surface area. So in case we've forgotten, this is a prism, so 2 times the area of the base plus the perimeter of the base times the height. And for volume, because it's a rectangular prism, length times width times height. So I'm going to plug in my base down here is a rectangle, it's actually a square, x times x. So I have 2 times x squared. My perimeter, there's 4 sides, x plus x plus x plus x would be 4x. And then my height, 2x. And I'll simplify that in just a second here. Length times width times height, so x times 2x. We're going to go ahead and simplify all that out. So we end up with 2x squared plus 8x squared over 2x cubed. Okay, so that gives us 10x squared over 2x cubed. So we have a common factor of a 2. So if we divide 10 by 2, we're left with 5. If we divide 2 by 2, we're left with 1. And then we have an x squared and an x cubed. So our x squareds cancel out, which leaves us just with an x in our denominator. So our simplified form is 5 over x. And then our excluded values, because we just have an x in our denominator, and we want to make sure that we go ahead and find those. And so our excluded values would be x equals 0.